Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our daily word. Today's Monday, March 29th. It's a beautiful morning. Kind of chilly this morning, but the sun's shining bright. So I'm glad you could join me for our few minutes together here as we end another month. Hard to believe. And that we are now in the midst of Holy Week. Holy Week that began yesterday with Palm Sunday. And of course, this Holy Week idea conjures up lots of emotions and thoughts about who we are and where God is at with us in the midst of our lives as we travel through this Holy Week and into Easter and the crucifixion and of course the resurrection. And so, this whole time during the season of Lent, we've been talking about during worship and our display in worship and our display. And here is the idea, as I've said before, that we are holy vessels that need to be filled. And so we've been talking a lot about what that means. This week we'll gather for worship on Thursday night at 7 o'clock for our Maundy Thursday service. We're going to talk about on Thursday night what it might have meant to be at the table and to be gathered around and to be in that conversation around the table, because that conversation would have been interesting based on everything the disciples knew and what they had begun to learn in those days following Palm Sunday, and then of course what that meal meant for them and the idea of the Last Supper. And so we're going to talk about that on Thursday night, and hope you'll join us. If you can't be here in person, it'll be here on Facebook Live as we gather for worship together. So yesterday we heard from Mark and his recounting of the Palm Sunday story. And this idea, and I talked a bit about it yesterday, but this idea that for this parade, this Palm Sunday parade, this second of two parades that happened on Palm Sunday. One, of course, was the parade for Pilate, this parade that expressed military might, that Pilate tried to put his stamp on his authority. And then this parade of Jesus and his followers and those who were there, who in some sense, as Mark tells it and the other gospel writers tell it, in a sense, they're protesting. This other parade is a protest against this authoritarian regime, and that they really wanted to be freed from their oppression. And so, we heard the story. Jesus sends two of his disciples to find a donkey, the foal of a donkey, and Jesus says to them, look, if someone asks you why you're there, just tell them the Lord needs it, and he'll bring it back shortly. And that's exactly what happened, and no one questioned, because as I said yesterday, Jesus, in this beginning of this and sending the disciples to get a donkey and giving that answer was the beginning of the stirring up of controversy, of emotion. And so the scripture for this morning is a bit of what's quoted in the gospel. It's from Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. And so we hear these words. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And so before we go too much further into Holy Week, there is this conversation, and I even said it. I'm not sure if I said it yesterday, but I said it in some pre-publication of Palm Sunday, this triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And really, as we hear about it, it's really a misnomer, this idea that this was a triumphal entry. Actually, there was no triumph about it at all. Rather, this was Jesus coming into Jerusalem. And the crowds, and it's always interesting, as I said yesterday, there are those who went before him and those who went behind, shouting their hosannas, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But Zechariah says to us that this entry into Jerusalem was a humble entry. Jesus mounted on a donkey. There really wasn't anything triumphal about it, but it was the beginning of this idea that something in the lives of those who gathered, who heard the words, who celebrated this entry, who wanted their lives to be different, now because of this entry, it's an idea that the story's changed, that the plot has thickened. And everything Jesus does, especially in the Gospel of Mark, as we're going to hear it through Holy Week, everything that Jesus does indeed stirs the pot. He challenges them when he overturns the tables, as Mark tells it. He challenges them when they ask him about the coin. And he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and God what is God's. He challenges them when they say, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And he calls them to love God and love their neighbor first and foremost. And it was as if in all of this conversation, that all hell was being unleashed. And those who were behind closed doors, the authorities, Pilate, others, their level of fear, of course, began to raise every single day because people were rallying around Jesus, and they were hearing these things and wondering if indeed this might be the change that, that they've been clamoring for all of their lives. This week, Passion Week as we know it, is an opportunity for us. It's an invitation for us, if you will, to become somehow disoriented by the love of God, to become shaken to the core of our comfortable being, and to somehow push aside our illusions about grace, to know that in this week, when all of these events take place and the pot is stirred, that all hell's about to break loose and the world's about to change in the midst of their lives and in our lives. And so this Holy Week is for us, this reminder that our lives too are shaped and formed by the Jesus who comes in humbly on a donkey. Our lives are shaped and formed by the Jesus who goes that night to the temple and doesn't find much to see there. And our lives are formed by the Jesus who overturns the tables, who challenges the authorities. Our lives are changed by the Jesus who invites the disciples to go find a place that they can eat their final meal together. And all of that takes place. And, it seems that for you and me, this week especially is an opportunity to, as I said yesterday, not very well, mind you, I don't think my sermon yesterday was very good at all. I didn't piece it together very well. I was disappointed at myself when I got done. But I wanted to say, and I tried to say, and I might have alluded to it, that we carry Jesus with us in our thoughts and our words and our actions and our deeds. And this entire time of doing the daily word for over a year now, I've often challenged the notion that we could live differently and that we should live differently. That if we're really, really followers of Jesus, whether we're ones who go first or ones who follow behind, that really our thoughts and our words and our actions and our deeds ought to be ones that carry Jesus with us. And we ought to guard our words, and we ought to guard our thoughts, and we ought to challenge our motivations for how we treat each other. And maybe I do have this pie in the sky idea, but I believe that this challenge of Jesus, the one that comes quietly on the foal of a donkey, the one that comes quietly into town from the other direction and changes the world, is the idea of how maybe we should be living our lives, especially this week, if nothing else. That we should look at our lives differently in the way that we can affect the lives of others, in the way that we are humble in how we treat each other and in the words that we say. And to hear this scripture again that Zechariah, really says to us, he is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey. It's interesting that this entry into Jerusalem is significant. And entries are always significant. How we meet a person, how we encounter a person for the first time or for the 150th time. Yesterday morning, before worship started, one of our folks came who hasn't been here for over a year, and prior to that she had fallen, and she's into her 90s. And her daughter called me the other day and said, "So we're back in session yet?" Because I said, yes. She said, "Well, Mom really wants to come." I said, "It'll be great to see her." And this is a person who always came to Bible study in her 90s. It's just a great person. And so I was ready to leave the sanctuary after talking to Jen and Therese and Pete about music and singing a little bit. And I was going down the side aisle, and here they came. And this sweet lady in her 90s, who is just this great person, walks up with a big smile on her face. And I said, "How are you? It's so good to see you." And her question was, "How are you? I hear that you," and she went through this litany of what I've got, because they've been telling me, she says. You see, how we encounter each other humbly is such an important thing. And I was so glad to see her, but her words back to me were, "But really, how are you?" She wanted to know, really, how are you? This person in her 90s. You see, when Jesus gives us the example of riding humbly into Jerusalem, he gives us an example of how we should treat each other. And while I struggled the entire time in worship yesterday, and while it wasn't the best sermon I've ever preached in my life, it was interesting beforehand, this idea that how we treat each other and how we humbly encounter each other is really how we're called to live our lives. And so I pray that this Holy Week might be one for you, that you look at it in that kind of way. That we treat each other humbly with love and hope and peace, and that we find ways to encounter Jesus along the way. So this entire Holy Week, we're going to hear some Holy Week scriptures. We're going to talk about what it means in all of this as Jesus moves through this Holy Week, to have our lives changed as we encounter the Jesus of this week. So I pray you'll know peace today. I pray you'll soak in the sunshine if you have the opportunity. I pray you'll know healing and love in your lives and know grace in your lives. Know God's love that surrounds you in such a powerful way. And know of my love for all of you. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning, and then of course Thursday night at 7 o'clock and Sunday morning at 10:15. Have a great day, my friends.